A new Ferguson police chief will be sworn in today. Major Delrish Moss has retired from his post at the Miami Police Department and will become the first African-American chief in a city where racial tensions have erupted after the shooting death of Michael Brown in 2014. Moss hopes to help repair relations between the police department and the community. So Major Moss, he's 51 years old. He's, like I said, a longtime Miami officer, and he's also the spokesman for the Miami Police Department. So there was a 3-month-long nationwide search in order to find the new police chief for Ferguson. And Delrish was selected in April, but he's going to be sworn in today at about 4 o'clock this afternoon. So obviously, we've seen since the shooting death of Michael Brown that Ferguson erupted in riots. There was a lot of political and social unrest as a result of that debacle. So this is supposedly going to be a nice step to repair some of those relations, particularly between the police department and the community, who's felt very disenfranchised and very underrepresented, at least in the police department. So there was also a Justice Department investigation last year that was looking into police conduct, and investigators found a pattern and practice of unconstitutional police conduct within the city. They found certain instances, including a system that uses arrest warrants as a means of creating revenue as opposed to, seeking justice. There's, of course, the disproportionate number of African Americans arrested, or just the arrest of minorities in general. The African American population makes up only 60% of the general population, but they were 93% of the arrests made. So really, this is I think it's a very symbolic gesture, and it's a very powerful step to hopefully try to ease some of those tensions. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I think it's a great move. Now, I'm not saying, okay, we put a black police chief in there, well, all better, problem solved. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is what we're going to have now in this police department is a unique perspective, one that we didn't have before. You have an all-white police force, basically, more or less, not all white, but as far as the leadership goes, you're not going to have things being seen from the other side, and you need that, right? There's things that white people don't even think about, right? If you're an African American and you're walking in to a liquor store, for example, in a city like Ferguson, you're probably thinking, oh God, they're assuming I'm going to steal something. They're assuming, they're looking at me like I'm being shady, right? These are things that white people don't have to think about because we don't,
right? Because
people don't assume certain things about us. But it's like, well, you need to see the other perspective, and that's why it's important to have, someone like him coming in and stepping in and taking the reins. It's important, and it's also, not just that; it's also symbolic, like you said.
Right, exactly. So it's not just Ferguson. So Ferguson only has a population of about 21,000 people. It's a relatively small town, but of course, because of Michael Brown and the attention that was focused on the police brutality aspect and the racial tension aspect, it became this huge national narrative.
Right.
So this, it really is it's symbolic in a lot of ways. But I mean, there was a New York Times interview where Mr. Moss was talking about some of the things that he would like to do once he is police chief. He talks about diversification. As you mentioned, there's about 54 police officers in Ferguson, and only 3 or 4 of them are African Americans. Right. There's very few females, and so he talks about how a lot of times police officers, or just the department itself, is very resistant to change. So it's, he's trying to deal with that. But also, like you said, I mean, if the police department doesn't reflect the community that it serves, there's automatically this disconnect between the two of them. He talks a lot about increasing police interaction, specifically with youth. He talks about wanting to establish mentoring programs, police athletic leagues. He wants to start staff walks where the staff, they'll walk around the community, talk to people, talk to business owners, and people that way, because he says that's one of the main things that when he was at the Miami Police Department that he was really good at. He was the spokesman. He really created this strong sense of community, as opposed to this, like I said, this disconnected sort of us versus them mentality. So he has this to say regarding that. He says, what people don't realize is that the community relations aspect of it is very critical to solving crime. We not only solve crime, we prevent crime because of the relationship. When the relationship is bad, that suffers. Police officers come into a neighborhood 10 hours a day, but it's the people who live there who know what's going on. If they don't want to talk to the police or deal with the police, you're not going to solve anything, and you're certainly not going to prevent anything. So again, he talks about how Ferguson sort of became the powder keg that blew up, but what happened there could happen anywhere, and does oftentimes. So, and he talks about how there's not necessarily an uptick in crime in general, but specifically an uptick in crime committed by youth. So I think that aspect, the mentoring program, the really creating that sense of community is a really strong step. And of course, we don't want to be super naive and say, well, now the problem's solved. But at the same time, I think really reflecting the community is.
We also
is
don't
want
to be naive and say Black Lives Matter. No. All lives matter, right? You don't say just Black Lives Matter. That's being naive because we're first off not saying that any life is more important. That's not the point. But what I'm saying is you touched on the point that this is happening not only in Ferguson. Ferguson's under the microscope, of course. Because it's the perfect example of what's going on a much smaller scale. It's kind of a microcosm of everything that we're talking about here. But we've done stories recently regarding SFPD, right? In San Francisco, all these racist text messages. They even found racist text messages in Ferguson between different police officers, right? Emails and stuff like that, talking blatantly, about other police officers or other people in the community, referring to them in terrible ways. So this is something that needs to be addressed, and I think it's very important. And it's naive to sit there and say, well, all lives matter. Let's not.
Oh yeah, we needed that Black Lives Matter movement to really draw attention to how disproportionate the brutality against people of color is.
Just look at the number of African Americans in a city that are a very small percentage of the population. Look at how disproportionate that is. So all you really have to look at is that.
It's the data. I mean, the data is on the side of this needing to be the way to deal with it. I mean, and of course he's asked about how he would have handled the Michael Brown situation, and I think rightly he says this is not about focusing on that. Unfortunately, what's done is done, but we need to move forward and we need to keep something like this from happening again. So we'll see how it turns out, but I think this is a very important step for Ferguson.